Hi, I will shortly introduce myself. I have none experience in working with leather. I work as a management consultant, and it is not like I cannot afford to buy an expensive watch and a leather strap. Nevertheless, as it turns out, a leather strap can be made easily, even by someone like you or me. I got the idea to make one after checking the prices of U-boat leather straps, which cost around 300 euros, something over $300 US. In this video, I will not try to make a copy of a specific watch strap, but rather make something I think will look cool and resemble straps that are handmade and very expensive. Have I succeeded in that quest? You will be the judge of that. At the end of this video, I will publish all the prices of the tools and materials I have used. So if you follow along, you will discover what the actual price difference is. So, here I have two pieces of leather, leftovers from the only previous project I have ever done. That video is also going to be published next on YouTube. The leather is quite thick, around 4 mm or 0.16 of an inch. Rather untypical judging from the videos I have seen so far. First, we need to cut the leather to the right size. For this I'm using a ruler, a pen and a craft knife or a hobby knife. Here I'm cutting to the width of 2 cm, since this is the desired width for the watch I'm going to mount it on. Usually the width is around 2 cm, so 1.8, 2 or 2.2 cm. Of course I'm talking about men's watches. Next step is to use the sandpaper to work out the edges after cutting the leather. First I'll be using the 120 grit sandpaper for rough sanding, then I'm passing to the 240 grit sandpaper for a fine finish. Repeat this process until you are satisfied. In the next step, I'm using the leather edging tool. So what it does, trims off the edges. The tool that I'm currently using was part of a cheap kit bought online, price of which I will mention at the end of this video, together with the prices of all the materials and tools used for this project. Next, we need to mark the center of the strap in order to later punch in some holes for the strap. A warning, I'm using a pink color pen, since I know I'm going to use a dark color dye afterwards, so I know it is not going to be visible. Please do not use one if you are going to use a lighter color afterwards. I'm also using an old watch strap for marking where the holes are going to be. You can also use one or just equally space the holes and mark it on the center line if you do not have one. So, let's punch some holes in our leather strap. For this task I'm using a so-called revolving leather punch tool, again a cheap tool bought online, the price of which you will discover at the end of this video. One piece of advice: be really careful with this tool, since it is quite easy to punch a hole which is not aligned with the others, so you have to start all over again. One thing I found worked out for me is to try several times to apply low pressure so that the tool leaves a slight mark on the leather. So you first see if it is all aligned, and only when you are satisfied, you actually apply more pressure. We also need to mark the edges of our strap that are later going to be folded and glued to the bottom side of the watch strap, leaving the room for the spring bars to be inserted. Here, I'm using just an old watch strap in order to roughly judge how long our piece needs to be. This is not a rocket science, so you really do not need to pay for a template. Now, we are going to use a leather stamping tool. This one in particular, I believe, is called the basket weave stamp, in order to make our strap a little bit more visually appealing. This particular stamp came in a cheap kit together with many others, so in case you decide to follow along, you can choose whichever stamp you think will look good on your watch strap. In order to use the stamp, the leather first needs to be soaked in water. Only on wet leather you can use the stamp, which will leave the mark that becomes permanent only when the leather completely dries out. After some time spent searching the web, I was able to find a video from which I understood how to use this particular stamp. Again, it depends which stamp you decide to use. Anyhow, I suggest watching a few videos before taking on this step, since every stamp works a little different. We will now do the same thing for the other strap. There is no need to go over the line which marks where the strap is going to be later folded. We also need to dye our watch strap. I have bought online a dark brown leather dye. You, on the other hand, can choose whichever color you like. In order to do this, you would need a brush and at least one glove, which you can steal from your wife and suffer for a few minutes, since a much smaller glove stops the blood circulation. Ask me how I know this. One piece of advice: do not panic if after the first passing the leather seems not equally dyed. This is normal, since it needs several coatings before you get that uniform color. Since the leather is so thick, in my case 4 mm, I have to reduce the thickness of the parts that are later going to be folded and glued to the bottom side of the strap, making room for the spring bars to be later inserted. For this, I'm using a simple crafts knife blade, since I have not had a better tool at hand. Be careful though not to cut yourself, since the probability is high if you are using it the way I'm using it. We also have to make the hole in the leather where the watch buckle tongue is going to go through. Take your time on this step, since it is easy to make a mistake and ruin a lot of hard work. A watch strap also needs to have a loop. Not having anything else at hand, I'm using the same 4 mm thick leather, and since the leather is so thick, I have to reduce its thickness, and again I'm using a crafts knife blade. Finally, we need to measure the length of the loop and cut it to the right size. This loop is going to be later dyed with the same color dye as the rest of the watch strap. It is also going to be stitched together with the same technique shown later in this video. Before we fold and glue the pieces together, we need to insert the buckle parts, so the spring bar and the tongue. In my case, the buckle was by far the most expensive part of this project. since it is made out of titanium. I have decided to leave the spring bar in and glue the leather over it, so that it settles down and it is ready afterwards to be mounted on the watch. I'm using the glue for the leather. Again, bought online, and you can choose whichever brand you like. I'm also using a toothpick to spread the glue on both surfaces. In order to press the glued parts together, I'm also using the plastic spring clamps or regular clamps. In addition, I'm also using the scrap pieces of leather in order to protect the straps. You do not have to use leather, a piece of cloth will also do. But remember to do so, otherwise you will see the marks left by the clamps on the leather. After 2 hours, it is all perfectly glued together. We should also make holes in the straps for sewing it up afterwards. This is done with a so-called stitching chisel tool, which was again part of the kit I'm constantly referring to. First, I'm using the 4-pin chisel tool just to mark where the holes should be at, and then I will use a 2-pin one. I'm doing this since I have discovered you need to apply much more pressure in case you're using a larger tool, and this is a thick piece of leather. With all tool, I'm making the holes a little bit larger, since the thread I'm going to use later is also thick. Finally, the stitching needs to be done. Here I'm using the thread and needles that were part of the same kit. I'm doing the so-called saddle stitch, even though there are many other ways to stitch leather together. Main reason being, this is the only one I know. Instead of me trying to convey my limited knowledge on this subject, I suggest searching online, since there are many videos out there. So, that's it. I hope you have enjoyed it. Tell me what you think. Have I managed to bake a decent leather strap? Is it good enough for my old U-boat watch model? I hope I have motivated you to try something similar on your own. Trust me, I had no previous experience, and I'm so happy with the result that I doubt I will ever again buy another watch strap. If you would like to motivate me to make more videos instead of going out for a beer or two on weekends, like, share, and subscribe. As promised, I'm also including all the costs incurred during this project. It is quite interesting how little all the tools and materials cost, and how much they are charging for a handmade leather watch strap.